Selfishness in the kingdom. We are talking today about living like Jennifer. Doing all the fireworks, eating all the ribs, pawning her kids off on her dutiful, loving husband. I tell you, but we're going to go about it in a little bit different manner. How many of you have ever read highlights? Okay, you probably had a subscription as a young person, as a kid. If not, every time you went to the doctor or the dentist, they were in the office. They always had little smiley face stickers in them that you could take. Jane reminded me of that. Highlights was a magazine for kids that helped teach kids how to be good. Everything was positive oriented. The stories were positively oriented. The cartoons all had a message behind them. And ultimately today we're going to talk about Goofus and Gallant. Be honest, how many of you remember Goofus and Gallant? Two brothers, okay, who lived very different lives. Jennifer, do you have an active subscription in your office for highlights? There you go. If we're talking in literary terminology, and this is high literature, Goofus and Gallant, Goofus is the foil to Gallant. He is the antagonist to Gallant's protagonism. He is the opposite. Both of them are, in essence, an archetype or a symbol broadly that reflects our lives in many ways. Now, what you see here are the two new characters, Goofus and Gallant. This is a current Goofus and Gallant cartoon that you'll find in the magazine. This one talks about Goofus changing the channel without asking, and Gallant always asking before he changes the channel. So we have Goofus, who is living selfishly for himself, and Gallant, who is living selflessly. The second cartoon shows Goofus coming in and throwing his wet jacket on the couch and saying, "It's only a little bit of water," while Gallant takes off his wet clothes in the mudroom and is very careful not to make a mess. In my day, this was Goofus and Gallant, the cartoon, hand-drawn, but the same message. Here we see Goofus bossing his friends around while Gallant is asking, "What do you guys want to do?" And then we see Goofus taking the last apple off the table and Gallant sharing his orange with his friends. Well, today we are Goofus-minded. We're talking about selfishness. And the question for us today is, how does selfishness impact the church? Well, the fact of the matter is, it impacts the church the same way it impacts the world. One thought, one action, one idea at a time. All it takes is for somebody to feel that they deserve more, or they are better, or they want, and their want is more important than anyone else. It's all about me. Well, they proudly call the 20-something generation right now the me generation. And life is all about them. If they're not happy, no one's happy. Anybody who's ever had a child has had to go through this process of trying to teach children not to be selfish. I think as human beings, we are bent toward selfishness for no other reason than a survival instinct. If you take us back centuries and centuries and thousands of years to the point where food wasn't in the grocery store and water wasn't in the tap and there were bad people all around us trying to take what we had to be selfish. We had to take what we could when we could get it and run away with it to live. But as time evolved and humanity evolved, what we see happening is that there is this idea of putting other people first. Selflessness. But today we're talking about me and all of the me's that are out here today. And how often we are still very selfish in our lives. Now, Paul's list of selfish acts that he talks about in the Bible only scratches the surface. It's a list that was going on probably within the church at Galatia. Things that were impacting that particular church at that time. We could take that letter that he sent to them and we could reflect it on our church, or we could reflect it on the Corinthian church back in Paul's time, or we could reflect it on the early church in the 3rd or 4th century. Sometimes the things that he's talking about there apply. Sometimes other things apply. What we've got to think about today is, what am I being selfish about? What am I doing right now in my life that puts me first? And why am I doing that? Why am I doing that? In counseling, when I would couple counsels, I would actually counsel some selfishness sometimes. Because there are times when a man or a woman, a husband or wife, need to step back and take a little time for themselves. Ultimately, because it's going to be healthy for the relationship. Now, we're not talking about that selfishness. We're talking about when our selfishness begins to hurt other people. Now, I got one slide ahead of myself, and some of you probably saw it. Who remembers what movie this is from? Beauty and the Beast. That's right. This is just a snapshot of a scene in which she's exploring the castle. She's exploring the castle, and the little candle guy and the clock guy are walking her around, and they're going up the steps, and she goes, "What's up here?" And they go, "Oh, you can't go up there. You can go anywhere in the castle but up there. That's the master's area." So what does she do? Goes right up where she's not supposed to be. Okay? And we begin to see the character of the beast evolve right before our eyes at this point of the movie. Because as she's wandering through his lair, his bedroom, which is a shambles, she sees the rose that the petals are starting to fall off, which means he must find true love and actually have somebody love him for who he is before the last petal falls. But another part of the scene is where she looks into this broken mirror. And we ask, why is it broken? Because he can't stand the sight of himself. He was arrogant and selfish beyond compare as a young prince, as a young man. And the witch cast a spell on him. Basically, until you can love and be loved for who you are, you'll remain a beast. And if that last petal falls, you'll remain a beast forever. That personification of the beast was who he was inside as a man. It was all about satisfying his desires. It was all about making his way the way. And Belle finds her way into his bedroom and begins to understand. That somewhere deep inside, there must be someone worth loving. But he didn't love himself. He hated himself. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw who he really was, this beast of a man who had hurt everybody who'd come across his path, who he had taken advantage of every step of the way. And now everyone was afraid of him. Everyone hated him. People hunted him. Now we know in the movie it plays out. He learns to love and to be loved. But for our consideration today, we see him as the beast. One of my favorite professors in seminary, his name was Wayne Oates. He was a pastoral care and counseling professor. He worked at the medical school at the University of Louisville, and he wrote a wonderful book for one of his classes that I took, and it was called Behind the Masks. And what he said was that we all wear masks to hide our true selves from the world. It's true. What happened with the beast was he was exposed by the magic of the witch so that he could no longer hide behind the mask of humanity, but was exposed for who he really was. As you read through Wayne Oates' book, he talks about different psychological perspectives and different personality types. But ultimately what he says is we've got to become comfortable with who we are. We've got to learn to love ourselves. We've got to be willing to take down the mask and show the world who we truly are. That's a very hard thing to do, especially when we're used to hiding. When we're comfortable putting in front of everyone else our persona of the moment. I've shared with you all before that personality-wise, I'm an extreme introvert. And when I started pastoring, and when I started, ultimately, actually it started freshman year college in communications class, where you have to get up and give a speech. I learned at that moment, having to stand before that class, that I could put on a mask, put on a persona. Because I went from being extraordinarily nervous, my stomach's rumbling. I mean, it's a 3-minute speech. Okay, you have your little index cards. There's 16 people in the class. They're all as nervous as you are. They're all 18, 19-year-old punks having to give a speech. But something happened. I discovered that I could hide while being out in the open. Now, I think I had done that most of my life, just never realized it. And I got up to give that speech, and emotionally I put on a mask, and I gave my speech. And I stepped back and I went, wow, that really works. I got up and acted like somebody else and finished the assignment and went and sat back down. Now, I was still truly an introvert, but I acted as if I wasn't. When I started to preach and having to get up in front of a congregation, I had to do the same thing. And I learned that pastors had certain masks they had to wear. They always had to be in a good mood. That's a mask. They always had to have the right answers. That's a mask. They always had to portray themselves as really ultimately better than you because you all were looking to him for that guidance and advice. Now I'm talking about a 22-year-old kid in his first church. Okay? So I put on the masks. And in some ways, that's selfish in and of itself. Because the church didn't know who I was. I was playing a role for them. That's what I thought I had to do. Thought that was my job. It wasn't until many years later that I learned that I could be myself before a group, or before a church, or before whatever. But it's hard. It's hard to take that mask off and reveal yourself because people can hurt you. So a lot of us are selfish. And we want to hide behind those masks. And we don't want to look in the mirror because when we look in the mirror, we say, "You're nothing but a liar. You're lying to all those people you see every single day. That's not you." See, selfishness often starts off as self-protection, but ultimately evolves into self-gratification. Because once you learn to wear those masks, you learn that you can get what you want by acting certain ways. And you can influence people that you didn't think you could influence before because you are wearing this certain mask. And then it begins to be about you. I've had so many friends that have pastored through the years, and their goal was always to get to that next big church. I'm here for 2 years. I'm taking a new church here for 2 years. I'm going to make my connections, and I'm going to the next one. And then I'm going to be there for 2 or 3 years, and then ultimately I'm going to make my connections there in that state or in that county or region, and I'm going to move to the next one. And my question was, why? Why did you always feel you had to move? Ultimately, it was about selfishness. It was about achieving what I could achieve and getting myself to a place of prominence in a denomination or in a church or in a position. When it should have been about sharing the Word of God. Now, big churches need pastors too. And there's a process of growing through growing and going through the tunnel as you move from church to church. Okay. But what's the motive behind it? I always respected the pastor that was at his church and working and living and striving and didn't seek that next church. Now, oftentimes that next church would come and they'd usually sit in the back row and be 3 or 4 people stood out like sore thumbs. And everybody asked, "Where are you from?" "Oh, we're just passing through." So they start off with a lie. Okay? And then they covertly call the pastor the next week or so and say, "Well, we visited a couple weeks ago and we'd like to talk to you about coming to our church." And there's absolutely nothing wrong with a pastor feeling led or God leading him or her to another church. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I always respected the guys who just worked hard, and then when that opportunity came and they felt God leading them and another church had contacted them, they moved on. But I never respected the guy who had a good situation and a loving congregation who said, "It's time to send my resume out." Well, what's wrong with the church you're at? Absolutely nothing. It's a great place. But it's time to go. It's all about selfishness. Now, we can apply that to the corporate world. We can apply that to the educational realm. We can apply that to any other area that you want to apply it to. And that's what I need you to do. I need you to ask yourself, where am I being selfish? Selfishness is not taking care of your family, because that's a necessity. You have to take care of your family. Selfishness is not making sure that your needs are met. It's important that your needs are met. Selfishness is stepping beyond that line and saying it's all about me. So we see the masks and we see the broken mirrors and the Beauty and the Beast. And we look at Paul's list of selfish behaviors. And we have to ask ourselves, what is there inside us that we need to change today? For some of you, it may just be just a little something. For some of you, it may be a mask that you've worn for some time that God's saying, I've told you time and time again, it's time to take that mask off. It's time to stop putting you first. So what I found by putting God first in my life is that all my needs are met. I'm not preaching before a television audience this morning. Okay? There aren't 7,000 people here today to hear this wonderful sermon. Don and I don't have the biggest house. We don't drive flashy new cars. But God has met our needs time in and time out. Sometimes, you walk that line. Go, boy, things are getting tight. As you can tell, I haven't missed many meals. God's been good. And I attribute that to Donna and I trying to live selflessly. Now, we're still selfish in many areas of our lives. And I can speak for myself. God convicts me of that. And I have to make the choice. Do I do what God's telling me to do? Or do I do what I've been doing all along? It's time for us to set our selfishness aside. Now, depending on the version of the scripture that you're reading from, Paul calls selfish behavior wickedness. That's a very strong word. Wicked. I'm not talking about the Broadway production. I'm talking about how our actions hurt other people when we're selfish. So the invitation before you today is simply look inside. Take that magic mirror and take a look at yourself this morning and say, do I like what I see? Or is there something God's trying to tell me I need to change? Again, for some of you, it might be something very small. It might be just a little tweak. Some of you may have been dealing with this, in the past, and you say, you know what? I know that stuff. I've worked on it. I've overcome that. Some of you may be going, I am selfish. And it's time to change. Larry's going to come and lead our closing song, and Jane's going to come play. And I'm simply going to ask, is God asking you to change? Now, maybe you don't need to come forward. Maybe you and him can deal with that right where you are, and that's okay. But if God's prompting you to come forward and to make a dramatic change in your life, then I encourage you to do that. If there's somebody here who doesn't know Jesus as Lord and Savior, today's the day to accept him and to start that process of life change from selfishness to selflessness. Maybe say, you know what, I need to be a member here. I've been visiting long enough. I want to make that commitment. I want to give everything that I can right here in this community of faith. Don't leave today with your mask on. Don't leave today still hiding from everyone else. God knows what you look like inside. Honestly, He's the only one we need to hide from, and He's the only one we can't hide from. If I go as far as the east is from the west, He is there. If I climb the highest mountain, He is there. If I go deep underground, He is there. Where can I hide from you, God? Nowhere is the answer. Don't make a change for me. Don't make a change for your husband or your wife. Don't make a change for your kids or your parents. Make the change. Because God so loved you, He sent His only begotten Son, that when you chose to believe, you would not perish, but have everlasting life. You can't get into heaven with the mask on. You're going to have to put it down somewhere. There is such a large pile of them right next to the pearly gates.